I slaughtered 6 snake eels to save the blue-skinned princess's life. She looked at me with innocent eyes and promised, when I grow up, I will marry you. I never thought her proposal would hide a terrifying secret that could in the future destroy us both. The crimson sun of Verity cast long shadows across the Canyon of Shadows as young Princess Populi raced along the winding path. Her blue skin glistened in the fading light, and her chestnut hair flowed behind her like a banner. At 7 years old, she embodied all the curiosity and joy of childhood, despite the royal blood that flowed through her veins and the responsibilities that awaited her. "Princess, please don't run so fast," called one of her guards, his voice laced with concern. "Stay where we can see you." But Popili paid no attention. The world around her was too fascinating. The blue leaves that rustled in the gentle breeze, the shimmering crystals embedded in the rocky walls of the canyon that caught and refracted the sunlight into 1,000 different colors. She laughed as she chased a small, 6-legged creature with fur as blue as the deepest oceans of Verity, her light purple dress fluttering around her knees. The guards exchanged worried glances as they hurried to keep up with their young charge. Princess Populi had always been willful and adventurous, traits that would serve her well as future queen, but made their job of protecting her considerably more difficult. "Look at this," Popili called out, pointing to a particularly large crystal formation that sent rays of light dancing across the canyon wall. The brilliance momentarily blinded her, and she took a step back, still gazing in wonder at the natural light show. She never felt the ground give way beneath her feet. One moment, Princess Populi was standing on solid ground. The next, she was falling through air, the hidden crevice beneath the deceptive covering of moss-like blue vegetation having opened up to swallow her whole. Her scream echoed through the canyon, high-pitched and terrified, as she plummeted into darkness. The guards raced to the edge of the crevice, their faces pale with horror. "Princess!" one shouted, dropping to his knees and peering into the darkness below. "Princess Populi, can you hear me?" A faint cry answered him, but the walls of the crevice were nearly vertical, with few handholds. The guards exchanged desperate glances. "We need to get help," said one, already turning to run back to the palace. "The ground isn't stable enough for both of us to attempt a rescue." "But the creatures that live down there," the other guard began, his voice tight with fear. "I know, go! Run as fast as you can!" As one guard raced back toward the palace, the other remained at the edge of the crevice, calling reassurances down to the frightened princess, though his own heart pounded with terror at the thought of what might lurk in the depths of the canyon. Not far away, Maud moved through the forest with the silent grace of a seasoned hunter. At 35, his body was a testament to years of hard work and survival in the harsh environments of multiple planets. His face was weathered, his eyes alert, constantly scanning for potential threats or prey. A large double-bladed axe hung across his back, its edge polished to a mirror shine, and various knives were strapped to his belt and legs. Maud had once been a military man, a soldier who had fought in conflicts across 3 star systems. Now he sought a quieter life as a hunter on Verity. Though quiet was a relative term on this beautiful but dangerous world, he had learned to respect Verity's deadly beauty, to navigate its perils, and to appreciate its wonders. When the sound of panicked voices reached his ears, Maud paused, head tilted to one side as he listened. Years of training kicked in as he identified the direction of the commotion and began moving toward it, his steps quick but careful. He emerged from the tree line to see a guard at the edge of a crevice, calling frantically into its depths. Without hesitation, Maud approached. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble that startled the guard. The guard whirled, hand going to his weapon, but relaxed slightly when he saw Maud was human. "Princess Populi fell into the crevice. The ground is unstable, and the walls are too steep. I've sent for help, but—" A child's frightened cry drifted up from below, cutting off the guard's explanation. Maud nodded once, already assessing the situation. He removed his pack and began searching through it, pulling out a length of sturdy rope. Without a word, he moved to a thick, exposed root that protruded from the canyon wall and began tying the rope around it, testing its strength with sharp tugs. "You're going down there?" the guard asked, eyes wide with surprise. "It's dangerous. There are creatures." "I know what lives in these canyons," Maud replied simply. securing the rope around his waist and shoulders in a makeshift harness. "Keep watch up here." Without waiting for a response, Maud began his descent, his powerful muscles controlling his descent as he rappelled down the nearly vertical wall. Loose stones dislodged under his boots, clattering down into the darkness below, but he paid them no mind. His focus was absolute, his movements precise. Each handhold was tested before he committed his weight, each foothold carefully chosen. As he descended further, the light dimmed, and the air grew cooler and damper. The walls glistened with moisture, making his grip more precarious. But Maud continued down, guided by the occasional frightened sob from below. At the bottom of the crevice, Princess Popili pressed herself against the damp wall, her small body trembling with fear. The fall had left her bruised and scraped, but miraculously nothing seemed broken. Her royal dress was torn and dirty, and tears streaked her blue face. But it wasn't the fall or her injuries that terrified her now. It was what surrounded her. In the dim light filtering down from above, shapes moved. Sleek, sinuous forms with scales that gleamed an iridescent blue. Snake eels, the locals called them. Predators with the body of a snake, but the savage jaws of an eel capable of striking with lightning speed and equipped with venom that could paralyze prey in seconds. They circled her, hissing and undulating, drawn by the scent of her blood from the scrapes on her knees and palms. Princess Popili whimpered, pressing herself harder against the wall as one of the snake eels slithered closer, its mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. A thud and the skittering of stones announced Maud's arrival at the bottom of the crevice. He landed in a crouch, immediately taking in the situation. The frightened child, the circling predators, the confined space that limited movement but also prevented the creatures from attacking from all sides at once. Without a moment's hesitation, Maud positioned himself between the princess and the snake eels, his axe now in his hands, gleaming even in the dim light. With his other hand, he drew one of his hunting knives, its blade wickedly sharp. The snake eels hissed, momentarily retreating from this new threat, but quickly regaining their courage. They began to circle again, more warily now, assessing the newcomer. "Stay behind me," Maud said to the princess, his voice calm and reassuring despite the danger. "Don't move unless I tell you to." The first attack came from his left, a snake eel lunging with blinding speed, jaws open wide. Maud's axe flashed, and the creature's head hit the ground, its body still writhing. But there was no time to celebrate. Two more attacks simultaneously from different angles. Maud spun, his weapons a blur of motion, as he parried one strike with his knife and cleaved another snake eel in two with his axe. A fourth creature managed to graze his arm with his fangs, but its teeth couldn't penetrate the tough leather of his sleeve. Princess Popili watched in awe as the human fought. She had never seen such speed, such controlled violence. The palace guards were skilled warriors, of course, but this was different. This was raw survival, primal and desperate. The human moved like a force of nature, each strike precise and deadly. One of the snake eels lunged past Maud's defense, heading straight for the princess. She screamed, but before the creature could reach her, Maud's knife embedded itself in the predator's body, pinning it to the ground. Without missing a beat, Maud kicked another attacker away and retrieved his knife, ready for the next wave. For what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, Maud fought, his breathing growing labored, sweat beading on his forehead. Several snake eels now lay dead or dying, but more seemed to emerge from crevices in the rock walls, drawn by the commotion and the scent of blood. A particularly large snake eel, nearly twice the size of the others, slithered forward, its eyes gleaming with a cold intelligence that the others lacked. It rose up, nearly reaching Maud's height, and let out a high-pitched shriek that made Princess Popili cover her ears. Maud faced the creature, his stance solid despite his exhaustion. When it struck, he was ready, sidestepping the attack and bringing his axe down in a powerful arc. But the snake eel was faster than he anticipated, twisting away so that the axe only grazed its scales. Before Maud could recover, it struck again, this time catching him across the cheek with its fangs. Maud staggered back, a hand going to his face where blood now flowed freely. The venom would take effect soon, he knew. He had perhaps minutes before his limbs began to grow heavy and numb. The large snake eel, sensing victory, prepared for another strike. But Maud wasn't finished. With a roar of defiance, he lunged forward, feigning with his knife to draw the creature's attention. When it moved to avoid the blade, Maud's axe swept in from the other side, catching the snake eel just behind its head and nearly severing it from its body. The massive predator collapsed, its death throes sending smaller rocks skittering across the ground. The remaining snake eels, witnessing the defeat of their leader, retreated into the darkness with hisses of frustration and fear. Maud leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, his face pale beneath his tan as the venom began to take effect. He knew he had to get the princess and himself out of the crevice before the remaining snake eels regrouped or more arrived. "Are you hurt?" he asked, turning to Princess Poppy. She shook her head, blue eyes wide with awe and concern. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to his face. "It's nothing," Maud lied, already scanning the walls of the crevice for a way out. The rope he had used to descend was no longer an option. One of the snake eels had severed it during the battle. His experienced eye caught sight of a narrow fissure in the rock wall opposite where they stood, a potential path upward. He staggered slightly as he made his way over to it, the venom beginning to affect his coordination. "We need to climb," he told the princess, gesturing to the fissure. "I'll carry you." Princess Poppy nodded, her small face set with determination despite her fear. Maud lifted her, settling her on his back. "Hold tight," he instructed, "and if you see a handhold or foothold I might miss, tell me." With the princess clinging to his back, Maud began the difficult ascent. Each movement was a battle against the encroaching numbness from the venom, each handhold a victory of will over failing strength. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the blood from his wound. Princess Poppy, for her part, did as she was told, pointing out potential holds that Maud might have missed in the dim light. "There," she would whisper, her voice close to his ear. "That rock sticks out. Can you reach it?" Halfway up, Maud's strength faltered, and for a terrifying moment, they hung suspended, his fingers barely maintaining their grip on the rock face. Princess Poppy felt him weaken and tightened her hold. "You can do it," she said fiercely. "You're the strongest warrior I've ever seen, stronger than all my father's guards." Something in her young voice, the absolute faith, the unwavering belief, sparked a renewed determination in Maud. With a grunt of effort, he pulled them up another few feet, and then a few more. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of struggle, they reached the top, emerging onto the canyon floor just as the second guard returned with reinforcements. Maud collapsed onto solid ground, gently setting the princess down before rolling onto his back, his chest heaving with exertion. The guards rushed forward, surrounding Princess Poppy, checking her for injuries, exclaiming with relief at her safety. For a moment, Maud was forgotten as the royal entourage focused on their precious charge. But Princess Poppy hadn't forgotten him. She broke free from the circle of guards and returned to Maud's side, kneeling next to him with a solemnity beyond her years. "You need medicine," she said, touching his wounded cheek with gentle fingers. "The snake eel poison will make you very sick." One of the guards approached with a small vial, offering it to Maud. "Anti-venom," he explained. "Standard issue for those of us who patrol the canyons." Maud accepted it gratefully, downing the contents in one swallow. The effect wasn't immediate, but he could feel the burning sensation in his veins begin to subside. As the guards prepared to transport the princess back to the palace, she remained by Maud's side, her small blue hand resting on his much larger one. "What's your name?" she asked. "Maud," he replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Then, with all the gravity of a royal proclamation, she said, "I promise, when I grow up, I will marry you. You are my hero, Maud." The guards chuckled indulgently, and even Maud couldn't suppress a smile at the child's earnest declaration. He reached out to ruffle her chestnut hair gently. "That's a very kind offer, princess," he said, not taking her words seriously, but touched by her childish sincerity. As the royal party departed, with Princess Poppy looking back over her shoulder to wave goodbye, Maud watched them go, the memory of her promise already fading as he focused on recovering from his ordeal. He could not know then how that promise, made in childish gratitude, would echo through the years to come. 7 years passed. On the harsh planet Zarus, Maud sat beside a dying fire, the wind howling around his small shelter. At 42, he was still strong, still capable, but the years had not been kind. Silver threaded his hair and beard now, and lines had carved themselves deep into his weathered face, testament to a life of hardship and solitude. His once gleaming axe lay beside him, its edge still sharp but bearing the nicks and scratches of countless battles. It had served him well over the years, as he drifted from planet to planet, taking odd jobs as a hunter, guide, or occasional mercenary, never settling, never staying long enough to form attachments. Maud added another piece of sparse firewood to the embers, watching as sparks spiraled upward into the dark Zarus sky. This planet was a harsh mistress, all stone and ice and biting wind. Game was scarce, and what little existed was tough and stringy, but it was quiet here, far from the conflicts that raged in more populated systems. A good place for a man who wanted to be left alone with his memories. And Maud had many memories, some beautiful, many painful. He remembered worlds of breathtaking beauty and terrifying danger. He remembered comrades who had fought beside him and enemies he had defeated. He remembered the faces of those he had saved and those he had failed to save. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, he even remembered a small blue face with chestnut hair and solemn eyes and a childish voice making an impossible promise. But such thoughts were foolishness, the sentimentality of advancing age, and he dismissed them quickly. Tonight, as the fire died and the cold crept in, Maud's thoughts were more practical. His supplies were running low, and the hunting had been poor. Perhaps it was time to move on, to seek work in one of the mining colonies a few systems over. The pay would be decent, the conditions brutal, but it would keep him fed and sheltered for a while longer. As he contemplated his dwindling options, a sound cut through the howling wind, the distinctive whine of an approaching spacecraft. Maud frowned, reaching for his axe. Visitors were rare on this part of Zarus and rarely friendly. He stepped outside his shelter, squinting against the biting wind as he searched the dark sky for the source of the noise. There, a pinpoint of light, growing larger as it descended, the sleek lines of an expensive vessel becoming visible as it approached. Maud's frown deepened. No mining company scout ship that. This was a private vessel, the kind owned by wealthy merchants or noble houses. What business could such people have in this desolate corner of Zarus? The ship landed with precision about 100 yards from Maud's shelter, its engines powering down with a soft whine. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a hatch opened and a single figure emerged, humanoid but clearly not human, bundled against the cold in rich furs that couldn't quite conceal the elegance of the clothing beneath. The figure approached, moving with care across the rocky ground. As it drew closer, Maud could see it was a young man of the same species as the inhabitants of Veraday, his blue skin almost purple in the harsh light of Zarus's moons. The visitor stopped a respectful distance away, pulling down the scarf that had protected his face from the wind. "Are you Maud, formerly of Earth, veteran of the Centauri conflicts?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. Maud's grip tightened on his axe. Few knew of his military service, and fewer still would have reason to seek him out because of it. "Who's asking?" he replied, his tone neutral but his stance ready for trouble. The young man bowed slightly, a formal gesture that seemed out of place in the harsh landscape. "I am Taran, royal messenger of the court of Veraday. I bring a communication for you from Her Highness, Princess Papili." Maud blinked, momentarily taken aback. Princess Papili. A name from long ago, attached to a memory that had faded with time. A small blue girl in a torn purple dress, looking up at him with solemn eyes as she made a child's promise. "Princess Papili," he repeated, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. What business could the Princess of Veraday have with me after all this time? Taran reached into his furs and withdrew a sealed envelope, bound with a blue ribbon that matched the color of Veradayan's skin. "I was instructed to place this directly into your hands, sir," he said, extending the envelope toward Maud. After a moment's hesitation, Maud accepted it, turning it over in his calloused hands. The paper was thick and expensive, the seal bearing the royal crest of Veraday, a crystalline formation that reminded him of the canyon where he had once fought for his life and for the life of a small princess. With a decisive movement, he broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of the same high-quality paper, covered in elegant handwriting. To Maud of Earth, hero of the Canyon of Shadows, I write to you as one who has never forgotten the debt owed for a life saved. 7 years have passed since you risked everything to rescue a foolish princess who had strayed too far from her protectors. In that time, much has changed in the court of Veraday, and indeed within the princess herself. I have recently ascended to the position of Crown Regent, following my father's decision to step back from daily governance due to ill health. As I prepare to eventually take the throne, I find myself reflecting on promises made and duties unfulfilled. It would honor me greatly if you would accept this invitation to return to Veraday as my personal guest. There are matters I wish to discuss with you that cannot be adequately expressed in a letter. The bearer of this message has been instructed to await your reply, and should you accept, to provide transportation directly to the Royal Palace of Veraday, where appropriate accommodations will be prepared for you. With sincere gratitude and anticipation, Princess Popoli of Veraday. At the bottom of the letter was a personal postscript in a slightly less formal hand. I have not forgotten my promise, Maud. Have you? Maud stared at the letter for a long moment, reading it twice to ensure he had missed nothing. A promise made by a child in a moment of gratitude and fear. Surely she couldn't still attach importance to such a thing. And yet here was a royal messenger with a royal ship, sent across star systems to find him. He looked up at Taryn, who waited patiently despite the biting cold. Why now? Maud asked. After 7 years. Why seek me out now? Taryn's expression remained professionally neutral. I cannot speak to Her Highness's motivations, sir. I am merely tasked with delivering the message and awaiting your reply. Maud looked down at the letter again, his thumb unconsciously tracing the elegant script. What awaited him on Veraday? A formal recognition of his past service, perhaps? A reward long delayed? Or something else entirely? Something hinted at in that personal postscript? Whatever it was, it had to be better than the slow death he faced here on Zarus, where each day was a struggle merely to survive, where the cold seeped into his bones and the isolation into his soul. Tell the princess I accept her invitation, Maud said finally, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into his coat. Taryn nodded, his expression betraying a hint of relief. Excellent, sir. If you would like to gather your belongings, the ship is ready to depart at your convenience. Maud glanced back at his shelter, at the few possessions that constituted his life on Zarus. There was little worth taking, some weapons, a few tools, a handful of personal items that had survived his years of wandering. It took him less than 15 minutes to pack everything of value. As he boarded the royal vessel, Maud cast one last look at the desolate landscape of Zarus. He felt no regret at leaving, only a strange sense of anticipation mingled with wariness. Whatever awaited him on Veraday, it represented a change, and change in Maud's experience was as likely to bring danger as opportunity. The ship's interior was a stark contrast to the harsh environment outside, warm, comfortable, elegantly appointed. Maud felt out of place among the polished surfaces and soft fabrics, his rough clothing and scarred hands marking him as an intruder in this world of luxury. As the ship lifted off, beginning its journey to Veraday, Maud settled into a plush seat by a viewport. He watched the bleak surface of Zarus fall away, replaced first by the blackness of space and then by the streaking stars of hyperspace travel. He withdrew the princess's letter from his coat, reading it again in the soft light of the cabin. I have not forgotten my promise, Maud. Have you? Despite himself, he smiled faintly. He had forgotten, or at least had tucked the memory away where it couldn't distract him from the business of survival. But now, summoned across the stars by a princess who apparently remembered a childhood promise, he found that memory returning with surprising clarity. A small blue face looking up at him with absolute faith. A childish voice, solemn and determined. I promise, when I grow up, I will marry you. You are my hero, Maud. Foolishness, of course. The fancy of a child, nothing more. Even if Princess Popoli remembered her promise, surely she didn't intend to honor it. A princess, soon to be queen, of a prosperous world like Verity, would have far better options for a consort than a aging, battle-scarred human drifter. And yet, as the ship hurtled through space toward Verity, Maud couldn't quite suppress a flicker of, what? Hope? Curiosity? He wasn't sure, but it was the first thing he had felt beyond mere determination to survive in longer than he cared to remember. On Verity, Princess Popili sat at a massive desk in the royal library, surrounded by stacks of official documents awaiting her attention. At 14, young for a human, but on the cusp of adulthood for her species, she had already assumed many of the responsibilities of ruling. Her father's health had declined rapidly over the past year, and while he retained the title of king, it was Popili who now handled most matters of state. She was dressed in a gown of royal blue that complemented her azure skin, her chestnut hair swept up in an elegant style that emphasized the delicate points of her ears and the high cheekbones that were characteristic of Veridean nobility. To most observers, she appeared every inch the royal regent, composed, dignified, focused on her duties. But those who knew her well might have noticed the slight distraction in her movements, the way her gaze occasionally drifted to the large windows that overlooked the palace gardens, as if she were waiting for something or someone. "Your Highness," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Popoli looked up to see her chief advisor, Lena, standing in the doorway of the library. "Yes, Lena? Word from the royal hangar, Your Highness. The ship dispatched to Zaris has returned. It will be landing within the hour." A smile broke through Popili's composed expression, a flash of the eager child she had once been visible beneath the royal facade. "Thank you, Lena. Has a suite been prepared in the East Wing, as I requested?" "Yes, Your Highness. And the formal dinner has been arranged for this evening, with a small reception beforehand to allow your guests to meet key members of the court." Popili nodded, her mind already racing ahead. Would he remember her? Would he recognize the woman she had become, in the child she had been? Would he understand why she had summoned him after all these years? "Your Highness," Lena's voice was gentle but cautious. "May I speak frankly?" "Always, Lena. You know that." The older woman moved further into the room, her expression concerned. "There has been talk among the court about this sudden invitation to a human with no notable status or connections. Some are questioning the wisdom of bringing such a person into the inner circle of the palace, especially during such a delicate time of transition." Popoli's expression cooled slightly. "I am well aware of the court's propensity for gossip, Lena. This man saved my life at great risk to his own when no one else could reach me. He has owed our hospitality, at the very least." "Of course, Your Highness. No one disputes that a debt of gratitude exists, but there are more discreet ways to discharge such debts. A monetary reward, perhaps, or a grant of land on one of the outer provinces." "Is that what you think I should do, Lena? Pay off my debt like a merchant settling an account?" Lena sighed, her own blue features creasing with worry. "I think, Your Highness, that you are at a crucial point in your regency. The nobles are watching your every decision, measuring your judgment, your adherence to tradition. This unusual invitation has raised eyebrows." Popoli rose from her desk, moving to stand by the window. From here she could see the royal hangar in the distance, where soon a ship would land, bearing the man who had occupied her thoughts for 7 long years. "Do you remember what I said to him that day, Lena? After he brought me safely out of the canyon?" Lena had been a junior lady-in-waiting at the time, assigned to the young princess's household. "I recall you were quite taken with your rescuer, Your Highness. Children often form intense attachments in moments of high emotion." "I promised to marry him when I grew up," Popili said softly, her gaze still fixed on the distant hangar. "I made that promise before witnesses, including members of the royal guard." Lena's eyes widened. "Surely you don't consider such a childish declaration binding, Your Highness. You were 7 years old, frightened, overwhelmed with gratitude. No one would expect—" "What I expect of myself matters more than what others expect of me, Lena. I have invited Maud de Verade to evaluate him, to see what manner of man he has become in these 7 years, to determine if he might have a place here in this court, and in my life. Your Highness, Lena's voice was strained. You cannot be considering the political implications alone would be enormous. The noble families expect you to choose a consort from among their sons, someone with the proper background, education, connections, someone who would strengthen my political position. Papili finished for her. Yes, I understand the game, Lena. I've been trained in it since before I could walk. She turned from the window to face her advisor. But I also understand that a ruler's word must have meaning. If the crown makes promises it does not keep, why should the people keep faith with the crown? Lena spread her hands in a gesture of helpless concern. There is wisdom in what you say, Your Highness, but surely there are limits to its application. A child's impulsive promise was made by a princess, Popley interrupted firmly. Royal by birth, royal in word and deed. I am not saying that I will marry him, Lena. I am saying that I will meet with him, speak with him, come to know him as the man he is now, and then I will decide. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. Lena recognized it as the same tone the king used when his mind was made up beyond any possibility of persuasion. She bowed slightly in acknowledgement of defeat. As you wish, Your Highness. Shall I arrange for you to be notified when the ship lands? Please. And have someone escort our guest to his quarters to refresh himself after his journey. I will meet with him before the reception. As Lena departed to carry out her instructions, Popley returned her attention to the window, to the distant hangar where destiny, her destiny, would soon arrive. She touched the blue crystal pendant at her throat, a nervous gesture left over from childhood. 7 years she had waited, growing from a child to a young woman, learning the intricacies of governance, preparing herself to rule. 7 years of remembering a human's courage, his strength, his gentle touch as he ruffled her hair. 7 years of wondering if the connection she had felt in that moment of rescue had been real or merely the product of a child's overwrought emotions. Soon she would know. The royal ship docked smoothly in the hangar of the palace, its engines powering down with a soft hum. Maud gathered his meager belongings, mentally preparing himself for whatever awaited him on Veraday. During the journey, he had availed himself of the ship's facilities to clean up as best he could, trimming his beard and washing away the grime of Zaris. But he remained acutely aware of how out of place he would look among the Veradaean nobility. As he descended the ship's ramp, Maud was met by a small delegation, 3 Veradaean officials in formal attire, their expressions politely neutral as they regarded the human in their midst. Welcome to Veraday, sir, the central figure said with a slight bow. I am Ronald, Chamberlain of the royal household. These are my assistants, Kayla and Doran. We have been instructed to escort you to your accommodations within the palace. Maud inclined his head in acknowledgement, unsure of the proper protocol but unwilling to appear completely ignorant. Thank you. I appreciate the welcome. Ronald gestured toward a waiting vehicle, a sleek, hover-capable transport of a design Maud had never seen before. This way, please. Her Highness has arranged for quarters in the east wing of the palace. You will have time to refresh yourself before meeting with her. As they traveled from the hangar to the palace proper, Maud gazed out at the landscape of Veraday. It was even more beautiful than he remembered. Lush forests with their distinctive blue foliage, crystal formations catching and refracting sunlight, elegant buildings that seemed to grow organically from the natural environment rather than imposing upon it. The palace itself was breathtaking, a sprawling complex of crystalline spires and graceful arches, parts of it seemingly carved directly from the living rock of the mountain upon which it stood. It was both a fortress and a work of art, designed to inspire awe and communicate power without resorting to brute intimidation. The vehicle passed through several security checkpoints before entering a private courtyard. Maud noted the guards, alert, well-equipped, professionally distant. Whatever else had changed in 7 years, the security of the royal family remained a priority. Ronald led Maud through a series of corridors, each more impressive than the last, until they reached what was apparently the east wing of the palace. Here the decor was slightly less formal, though no less elegant, with large windows offering spectacular views of the surrounding mountains and forests. These will be your quarters during your stay, Ronald announced, opening a door to reveal a suite that was larger and more luxurious than any accommodation Maud had ever occupied. Her Highness has instructed that you are to be provided with whatever you require. Should you need anything, simply use the communication panel by the bed. Maud entered the suite, taking in the spacious living area with its comfortable seating, the separate bedroom visible through an open doorway, the bathing chamber tiled in what appeared to be actual precious stones. "This is very generous," he said, feeling distinctly out of place among such luxury. Ronald nodded, his expression still carefully neutral. "Her Highness will receive you in 1 hour. Appropriate attire has been provided in the wardrobe. I will return to escort you at the appointed time." With that, the chamberlain and his assistants withdrew, leaving Maud alone in the opulent suite. For a moment he simply stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from the harsh conditions of Zarus to this almost unimaginable luxury. Then, practical as always, he set about exploring his new surroundings and preparing himself for the meeting to come. The wardrobe did indeed contain clothing, several outfits in fact, all in a style that blended Viridian fashion with human proportions. Maud selected the simplest and most practical of these, a tunic and trousers in dark blue with minimal ornamentation. The bathing chamber proved to be another revelation. Hot water on demand, soaps and oils that smelled of unfamiliar but pleasant spices, towels so soft they seemed to caress rather than dry. Clean, dressed in clothing that actually fit him properly for the first time in years, Maud stood before a mirror, hardly recognizing himself. The rough drifter from Zarus had been transformed, at least superficially, into something that might not look entirely out of place in a royal palace. But beneath the fine clothing, he remained what he had always been, a survivor, a fighter, a man who had seen too much and lost too many to place much faith in appearances. Whatever game the princess was playing, he would need to keep his wits about him. A chime sounded, announcing Ronald's return. Maud squared his shoulders and moved to the door. Time to discover what Princess Papili really wanted from him after all these years. Ronald led him through a different series of corridors, these more heavily guarded and more richly decorated, clearly approaching the heart of the palace's royal quarters. They stopped before a set of massive doors carved from what appeared to be a single piece of blue-veined stone, polished to a mirror shine. "Her Highness will receive you in the azure chamber," Ronald announced, gesturing for the guards to open the doors. "Please proceed directly to the center of the room and await her arrival." Maud entered a circular chamber of breathtaking beauty. The walls were lined with the same blue-veined stone as the doors, but here inlaid with crystal formations that caught the light from hidden sources, creating patterns that shifted and moved across the surfaces. The floor was polished to such a high shine that it seemed almost liquid, reflecting the crystalline ceiling above, where a representation of Veriday's night sky had been created in precious stones. As instructed, Maud moved to the center of the chamber and waited, standing straight but relaxed, his hands at his sides. He had faced worse than a royal audience in his time. After a few minutes, a smaller door at the far side of the chamber opened, and Princess Popili entered. Maud's first thought was that he would have known her anywhere. Though 7 years had transformed the child into a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, something essential remained unchanged. The set of her chin, perhaps, or the direct gaze that met his own without hesitation. She was beautiful, of course, in the way of her species, tall and graceful, with azure skin that seemed to glow from within, high cheekbones and slightly pointed ears. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elaborate style that emphasized the elegant length of her neck, and she wore a gown of deepest blue, accented with crystal beads that caught the light with every movement. But it was her eyes that held Maud's attention, the same eyes that had looked up at him with childish hero worship 7 years ago, now regarding him with an intelligence and composure that spoke of the responsibilities she had shouldered in the intervening years. She approached him with measured steps, stopping at a distance that was neither too familiar nor too formal. "Maud of Earth," she said, her voice clear and musical, "you honor us with your presence." Maud bowed slightly, guessing at the appropriate protocol. "Princess Popili, the honor is mine." A smile touched her lips, warming her formal greeting. "You look well. Life has clearly been eventful since we last met." "That's one way to put it," Maud replied, a hint of his usual directness showing through the veneer of politeness. "Your message came as a surprise. It's not every day a drifter on Zaris receives a royal invitation. I imagine not. She gestured to a pair of chairs arranged near a crystal inlaid table, where a decanter and glasses waited. Please sit. We have much to discuss, and I would prefer to do so comfortably rather than standing on ceremony. Maud followed her lead, taking the offered seat. Princess Popoli poured a clear, slightly iridescent liquid into 2 glasses, offering one to Maud. Crystalline nectar, she explained, a Viridaean specialty, quite harmless to humans, I'm assured. Maud accepted the glass with a nod of thanks. Your message mentioned matters you wish to discuss. I admit I'm curious about what business the Crown Regent of Viridae might have with me after all these years. Princess Popili took a sip of her nectar before responding, her gaze steady on his face. Direct as ever, I see. It's refreshing, actually, after years of courtiers who take 100 words to say nothing at all. She set her glass down with a deliberate movement. You must be wondering why I brought you here. Why now, after 7 years? The thought had crossed my mind. My father is ill, she said simply. He has been for some time, though we've kept the severity of his condition from public knowledge. The royal physicians give him perhaps a year, no more. When he passes, I will become Queen of Viridae. Maud nodded, still unsure of the connection to himself. I'm sorry to hear of your father's illness, but I don't see what this has to do with me. Princess Popoli rose, moving to a window that overlooked the palace gardens. For a moment she simply gazed out, her profile silhouetted against the light. Do you remember what I said to you, Maud, after you rescued me from the canyon? Maud hesitated, uncertain of the appropriate response. Would it be worse to admit he remembered or to pretend he had forgotten? In the end, honesty seemed the safest course. You said you would marry me when you grew up. It was a child's gratitude, nothing more. She turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. Was it? Perhaps. But it was also a promise made by a princess of the royal house of Viridae. Such promises are not given lightly, even by children. Maud set his own glass down with more force than he intended, a flash of his usual bluntness breaking through. Princess, with all due respect, you can't possibly be suggesting that you brought me across star systems because of a child's impulsive declaration? Can't I? She returned to her seat, leaning forward slightly. Maud, in the 7 years since that day, I have thought of you often, of your courage, your resourcefulness, your willingness to risk everything for a stranger. These are not common qualities, even among the noble houses of Viridae. They are the qualities of a soldier, princess, not a royal consort. I'm a drifter, a hunter, occasionally a mercenary when credits run low. I have no place in a palace, no understanding of court politics or royal duties. Perhaps not yet, she conceded, but you have other qualities that cannot be taught. Courage, integrity, the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. These are qualities a queen might value in a consort, particularly in challenging times. Maud frowned, sensing there was more to this than she was saying. Challenging times? I was under the impression that Viridae was prosperous and peaceful. A shadow crossed Princess Popoli's face. Viridae itself, yes, but our position in the larger interstellar community has become complicated. There are factions within the noble houses that advocate for different alliances, different futures for our world. My father's illness has accelerated these political maneuverings. She leaned back, her gaze still fixed on Maud. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. I did not bring you here to thrust you immediately into politics or to hold you to a child's promise. I brought you here because I wish to know the man you have become, to see if there might be a place for you in Viridae's future, and in mine. Before Maud could respond, a chime sounded, and the door through which Princess Popili had entered opened again. Ronald appeared, bowing deeply. Your Highness, the reception is prepared. The guests await your arrival. Princess Popoli nodded, rising gracefully from her seat. Thank you, Ronald. We will join them shortly. She turned back to Maud. I've arranged a small gathering, an opportunity for you to meet some of the court and for them to meet you. Nothing formal, merely a prelude to dinner. Maud stood as well, feeling distinctly out of his depth. Princess, I'm not sure this is wise. I'm not accustomed to court functions. Which is precisely why this informal reception is a good beginning, she interrupted gently. These are people you should know, Maud, if you are to understand Verity and its place in the wider universe. And they should know you. See that you are more than the rumors that have undoubtedly been circulating since your arrival. She moved closer, lowering her voice so that Ronald, still waiting by the door, could not hear. I am not asking for an immediate answer to a question I have not yet formally asked. I am asking for time. Time for you to know Verity. Time for Verity to know you. Time for us to discover if what I believe might be possible truly is. Maud looked down at this young woman, so different from the child he had rescued and yet somehow the same in her directness, her determination. He had come to Verity out of curiosity, out of a desire to escape the slow death that awaited him on Zaros. He had not expected this. Time, he repeated, considering. I can give you that much at least? A smile broke across her face, transforming her formal demeanor into something warmer, more reminiscent of the child she had been. Excellent. Then shall we face the court together, Maud of Earth? She offered her arm in a formal gesture, and after a moment's hesitation, Maud took it, feeling the delicate strength beneath her skin. Together they moved toward the door where Ronald waited, toward whatever future awaited them in the court of Verity. As they entered the reception hall, Maud was immediately aware of the hush that fell over the assembled guests. 24 or so Veridean nobles turned as one to observe their princess entering on the arm of a human stranger. The scrutiny was palpable, curiosity mingled with something that might have been disapproval or simple caution. Princess Popoli navigated the room with practiced ease, introducing Maud to key figures of the court. Lord Talon, head of the conservative faction, Lady Mira, leader of the progressives, Ambassador Fran of the Galactic Alliance, and others whose names and titles blurred together in Maud's mind. He did his best to respond appropriately, to remember the complex web of relationships and alliances that Princess Popoli sketched for him in brief asides between introductions. But he was a soldier, not a diplomat, and the subtleties of court politics remained largely opaque to him. What was clear, however, was that Princess Popoli commanded respect, even from those who might disagree with her policies or decisions. The nobles deferred to her with a deference that went beyond mere protocol, suggesting genuine regard for her judgment. It was also clear that Maud himself was an object of intense curiosity and speculation. Whispers followed them as they moved through the room, quickly silenced when Princess Popoli glanced in their direction, but resuming as soon as her attention was elsewhere. They're wondering why you're here, she murmured during a brief moment when they were relatively alone, watching as servants circulated with trays of exotic refreshments. Wondering what your presence means for the balance of power in the court? Maud accepted a glass of some sparkling blue beverage from a passing servant, using the moment to scan the room. His military training had taught him to read a room, to identify potential threats and allies. Here, the threats were not physical, but political, yet no less dangerous for that. And what does it mean? He asked quietly, his gaze returning to Princess Popoli. She sipped her own drink, her expression revealing nothing to the watching courtiers. That depends on you, Maud, on the choices you make in the days to come. Before he could press for a more specific answer, they were approached by a tall, distinguished Veridean male, whose elaborate clothing and confident bearing marked him as a person of importance. Your Highness, he said, bowing with practiced grace, how delightful to see you taking a brief respite from your many duties. Lord Seven, Princess Popoli acknowledged him with a slight inclination of her head. Allow me to introduce Maud of Earth. Maud, this is Lord Seven, Royal Advisor and head of House Merrill, one of our oldest noble families. Maud nodded, noting the calculating assessment in Lord Seven's eyes as they exchanged greetings. Ah, the human hero we've heard so much about, Lord Seven said, his tone just this side of condescending. Your exploits in the Canyon of Shadows have become quite the legend in Veridean folklore. Children are taught that even aliens can display courage when properly motivated. The subtle insult was not lost on Maud, but he had faced worse in his time. I find courage is universal, Lord Savan, as is its absence. A flicker of surprise crossed Lord Savan's features before his polite mask reasserted itself. Indeed. And what brings you back to Veraday after all these years? Surely not nostalgia for a brief adventure in your younger days? I was invited by Princess Popoli, Maud replied simply. It seemed discourteous to refuse. Lord Seven's gaze shifted to the princess, who had been watching the exchange with a carefully neutral expression. How fortunate for us all that protocol triumphed over practicality. It must be quite an adjustment, transitioning from, where was it you were found? Zarus? A rather primitive outpost, I understand. Primitive compared to Veraday, perhaps, Maud conceded, but it teaches valuable lessons about survival, about what truly matters when comforts are stripped away. Fascinating, Lord Savan murmured, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. And how long do you anticipate your stay on our world will be? Before Maud could respond, Princess Popoli smoothly interjected. Maud will be remaining on Veraday indefinitely, as my personal guest and advisor on interspecies relations. This was news to Maud, but he kept his expression neutral, understanding that some game was being played here that he did not yet fully comprehend. Lord Savan's composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise showing through his practiced diplomacy. Advisor? How unexpected. I was unaware that the Crown had created such a position. It seemed prudent, given our increasing engagement with the wider galactic community, Princess Popoli replied smoothly. Maud's unique perspective as a human who has lived on multiple worlds will be invaluable as we navigate our evolving role in interstellar politics. Of course, Lord Seven recovered quickly, a most innovative approach. The conservative faction will be most interested to hear of this new direction in royal policy. With another bow slightly less deferential than his first, Lord Seven withdrew, immediately engaging in low-voiced conversation with several other nobles who had been watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Advisor on interspecies relations? Maud questioned quietly once Lord Savan was out of earshot. Princess Popili's lips curved in a slight smile. It seemed a plausible explanation for your presence that would give you a defined role without immediately raising the specter of other possibilities. Maud raised an eyebrow. You just created a royal advisory position on the spot to confound your political opponents. Is that a common occurrence in Veradean politics? Not common, no, but the royal prerogative allows for certain flexibilities when necessary. She led him toward another group of courtiers, but before they could engage, a chime sounded, signaling the transition to dinner. The guests began moving toward an adjoining chamber, where an elaborate feast had been prepared. As they walked, Princess Popili spoke in a low voice that only Maud could hear. That went as well as could be expected. Lord Savan will report to the conservative faction, who will begin plotting immediately to determine your true purpose here and how to neutralize any threat you might pose to their influence. And do I pose a threat? She glanced up at him, her blue eyes glinting with something that might have been amusement or calculation. That depends entirely on what you decide, doesn't it? For now, you are an unknown factor in their equations, which makes you dangerous by default. The dinner that followed was a masterpiece of Veradean cuisine and political theater. Maud found himself seated to the right of Princess Popoli at the head of the table, a position of honor that did not go unnoticed by the assembled nobles. Throughout the meal, he was subjected to polite but probing questions about his background, his experiences, his views on various interstellar political situations. He answered as honestly as he could while following Princess Popoli's lead on matters where his ignorance might prove problematic. She smoothly redirected conversations that ventured into particularly sensitive areas, all while maintaining the appearance of a gracious hostess presiding over a pleasant social gathering. It was exhausting, this constant navigation of hidden currents and unspoken agendas. By the time the final course was served, a delicate confection of crystallized fruit that dissolved on the tongue in a burst of complex flavors. Maud was more tired than he had been after full days of hunting on Zarus. As the dinner concluded and guests began to depart with elaborate farewells, Princess Popili touched Maud's arm lightly, drawing his attention. You've done remarkably well for your first encounter with court politics, she said quietly. Better than many who have spent their lives preparing for such occasions. Maud shrugged slightly. Military strategy isn't so different from political maneuvering. Identify objectives, assess resources, anticipate opposition, adapt as needed. An insightful comparison, she replied, a note of approval in her voice, though court battles tend to involve fewer actual weapons. Fewer visible weapons, Maud corrected, thinking of the carefully crafted barbs and calculated sleights he had observed throughout the evening. Princess Popoli smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Precisely. You understand more than you let on, I think. As the last of the guests departed, she rose from her seat. It's been a long day for you with the journey from Zarus and this immediate immersion in court society. Ronald will escort you back to your quarters. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I would like to show you more of Veraday, beyond the palace walls. Maud stood as well, suddenly aware of just how tired he was. I'd like that. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Sleep well, Maud of Earth, and thank you for coming. As Maud followed Ronald back through the corridors of the palace to his suite in the East Wing, he found himself replaying the events of the day. The unexpected summons, the journey from Zarus, the revelations in the Azure Chamber, the subtle political maneuvering of the reception and dinner. Princess Popili had brought him to Veraday for a purpose that went beyond a child's promise. That much was clear, but what that purpose might be, and whether he could or should fulfill it, remained uncertain. One thing, however, was becoming increasingly evident. The princess who had once looked up at him with childish hero worship had grown into a young woman of considerable intelligence, political acumen, and determination. Whatever game was being played in the court of Veraday, she was no one's pawn, and neither, Maud resolved as he entered his suite and closed the door behind him, would he be. The following morning, Maud was awakened by a gentle chime from the communication panel beside his bed. He had slept deeply, exhausted by the journey and the tension of the previous day's events, but his military training allowed him to transition quickly from sleep to full alertness. Yes, he responded, activating the panel. Good morning, sir, Ronald's voice replied. Her Highness requests your company for a private breakfast in the garden pavilion, followed by the excursion she mentioned yesterday. Appropriate attire has been laid out in your wardrobe. I will arrive to escort you in half an hour, if that is convenient. That's fine, Maud agreed, already rising from the bed. I'll be ready. The appropriate attire proved to be a more casual version of yesterday's formal wear, still finer than anything Maud had owned in years, but designed for comfort and ease of movement rather than court impression. The tunic and trousers were a deep green that would blend well with natural surroundings, suggesting that Princess Popili's planned excursion might involve more than just a ceremonial tour of the palace grounds. Half an hour later, freshly bathed and dressed, Maud was following Ronald through yet another series of corridors, these leading downward and outward toward what appeared to be the rear of the palace complex. They emerged into a garden of breathtaking beauty, not the formal, symmetrical arrangements typical of Earth palaces, but a seemingly wild yet subtly ordered landscape that blended seamlessly with the natural environment beyond the palace walls. The garden pavilion proved to be a graceful structure of crystal and living wood, open on all sides to the surrounding beauty, but sheltered by a transparent dome that allowed sunlight to filter through while protecting against inclement weather. Within, a small table had been set with a simple but elegant breakfast, and Princess Popoli was already seated, awaiting his arrival. She wore an outfit similar to his in practicality, a tunic and trousers of pale blue, with sturdy boots and a light jacket suitable for outdoor exploration. Her hair was arranged in a simpler style than yesterday's formal updo, practical yet still befitting her royal status. Good morning, Maud, she greeted him, gesturing to the seat opposite her. I hope you slept well after yesterday's excitement. Maud took the offered seat, noting that they were alone in the pavilion, with no servants or guards in immediate attendance. Better than I have in years, actually. Your hospitality is generous. The least we can offer, considering the circumstances of your arrival. She poured a steaming beverage from a crystalline pot into 2 cups. Viridian tea. It has properties similar to your Earth coffee, but with a more complex flavor profile. I'm told humans find it quite agreeable. Maud accepted the cup, inhaling the aromatic steam before taking a careful sip. The flavor was indeed complex, notes of what might have been cinnamon and something like citrus, but with undertones he couldn't identify. "It's good," he acknowledged, setting the cup down. "Different, but good." Princess Popoli smiled, seeming pleased by his approval. She gestured to the array of foods on the table, fruits, some recognizable and others exotic, bread-like items in various shapes and colors, what appeared to be some form of protein. "Please, help yourself. We have a full day ahead of us." As they ate, the conversation remained light. Princess Popoli asked about Maud's travels since leaving Veraday 7 years ago, listening with genuine interest as he described the various worlds he had visited, the odd jobs he had taken, the challenges he had faced. He found himself speaking more freely than he had in years, perhaps because she listened without judgment, with a curiosity that seemed authentic rather than calculated. "You've seen more of the universe than most Veradayan nobles," she observed as they finished their meal. "Even those who consider themselves well-traveled typically visit only the major hub worlds, staying in accommodations that differ from their palaces only in the view from the windows." "There's something to be said for comfort," Maud replied, thinking of the many nights he had spent sleeping rough on hostile planets, always alert for danger. "But you don't learn much about a world or its people from inside a luxury suite." "Precisely why I've arranged today's excursion," Princess Papili said, rising from her seat. "I want you to see Veraday as it truly is, beyond the palace walls and the formal gardens, to understand what we're fighting to preserve." The "we" caught Maud's attention, but before he could question it, Princess Papili was already moving toward the pavilion's exit. "Come, our transportation awaits." Their transportation proved to be a pair of what Maud recognized as skimmers, sleek, anti-gravity vehicles designed for terrain too rough for conventional ground transport, but requiring more maneuverability than true aircraft. They were popular on frontier worlds for exploration and hunting, though the models waiting in the palace's private hangar were considerably more advanced than any Maud had previously encountered. A small group of guards stood at attention nearby, but to Maud's surprise, Princess Papili waved them back. "We won't be needing an escort today," she informed them, her tone brooking no argument. "Advise Security Chief Laren that I am taking our guest on the Eastern Circuit and will return before sunset." The guards exchanged glances, clearly unhappy with this directive, but unwilling to directly challenge their princess. The senior officer bowed stiffly. "As you wish, Your Highness, but I must insist that you carry emergency beacons, at minimum." Princess Popoli accepted this compromise with good grace, allowing the officer to provide both her and Maud with small devices that could be attached to their clothing. "Satisfied, Captain?" "No, Your Highness, but I know better than to argue further," the officer replied with a hint of long-suffering in his tone. Princess Popoli laughed, a sound that reminded Maud of the child she had been. Free and unrestrained, a glimpse of the person behind the royal facade. "Wise of you, we'll be perfectly safe." She moved to one of the skimmers, mounting it with practiced ease. "Do you know how to operate one of these?" she asked Maud. He nodded, approaching the second vehicle. The controls were more sophisticated than those he was familiar with, but the basic principles appeared similar. "I can manage." "Excellent. Follow me then. I have much to show you." With that, she activated her skimmer, the vehicle rising smoothly a few feet off the ground. Maud did the same, quickly familiarizing himself with the controls. Princess Popoli guided her skimmer toward an open area of the hangar that Maud now realized was a launch bay, its doors retracting to reveal a panoramic view of the landscape beyond the palace. And what a landscape it was. From this elevated position, Maud could see for miles in all directions, the palace mountain giving way to rolling hills, then to forests of blue-leaved trees, their color creating the illusion of a vast ocean stretching to the horizon. Crystal formations punctuated the landscape, some as small as houses, others rising like natural skyscrapers, all catching and refracting the sunlight in dazzling displays of color. Princess Popili didn't give him long to admire the view, however. With a wave of her hand, she guided her skimmer out of the launch bay and into the open air, accelerating smoothly. Maud followed, quickly adapting to the responsive controls of his vehicle. They traveled east, away from the more developed areas surrounding the palace, into increasingly wild territory. Princess Palpili maintained a pace that was swift but not reckless, occasionally glancing back to ensure Maud was keeping up. He had no difficulty matching her speed. In fact, he found himself enjoying the exhilaration of the ride, the wind in his face, the sense of freedom that came with speed and open space. After perhaps an hour of travel, Princess Papili began to slow, eventually bringing her skimmer to a hover above a particularly dense section of forest. She gestured for Maud to pull alongside her. "Below us is the Whispering Wood," she explained, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the gentle hum of the skimmers. "One of Veriday's oldest forests and home to some of our most ancient crystal formations. The trees here have stood for thousands of years, longer than the royal line itself." Maud looked down, seeing how the forest canopy was interrupted by crystal spires that rose above the trees, gleaming in the sunlight. "It's beautiful," he acknowledged, "and strategically significant, I'd imagine. Those crystal formations must be valuable." Princess Papili gave him an approving look. "Yes, though not in the way most off-worlders assume. It's not their material value that matters, though that is considerable, but their role in our planet's ecosystem. The crystals here, as throughout Veriday, serve as conduits for energy that sustains all life on our world." She guided her skimmer lower, indicating that Maud should follow. They descended through a natural gap in the canopy, the vehicles now moving at a much slower pace as they navigated between the massive trunks of the blue-leaved trees. "We'll continue on foot from here," Princess Papili announced, bringing her skimmer to rest in a small clearing. She dismounted with graceful efficiency, securing the vehicle with practiced movements. Maud followed suit, taking in their surroundings as he did so. The forest floor was carpeted with smaller plants in various shades of blue and purple, punctuated by what appeared to be naturally occurring crystal formations, ranging from tiny shards no larger than his finger to substantial growths the size of small boulders. The air was filled with the soft sounds of unknown wildlife and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. "This way," Princess Popley said, setting off along what seemed to be a game trail rather than an established path. Maud followed, his senses alert for potential dangers. Beautiful as this forest was, experience had taught him that the most appealing environments often harbored the deadliest threats. They walked in silence for some time, Princess Papili leading the way with confident steps that suggested she was familiar with their route. Occasionally she would pause to indicate a particular plant or crystal formation, offering brief explanations of their significance in Veridaean ecology or culture. Maud listened attentively, building a mental map of their surroundings, while simultaneously considering the larger question of why Princess Papili had brought him here. This was no mere sightseeing excursion. She had a purpose, a message she wanted to convey, though its exact nature remained elusive. Finally, after nearly an hour of walking, they emerged from the densest part of the forest into a clearing dominated by an enormous crystal formation. A spire that rose at least 100 feet into the air, its faceted surfaces creating a kaleidoscope of color as the sunlight passed through it. Princess Papili stopped, turning to face Maud. "The heart of the Whispering Wood," she said, gesturing to the massive crystal. "One of the oldest and most powerful crystal formations on Veridae. It's been here since before my ancestors first established the royal line, guiding and nurturing the forest around it." She moved closer to the crystal, placing her hand on its surface with a reverence that spoke of deep cultural significance. "These crystals are Veridae's true treasure, Maud. They are the source of our world's unique energy patterns, the reason our people evolved as we did, the foundation of our society and technology. They cannot be replicated or manufactured. They grow naturally, but only over centuries, and only under specific conditions that exist nowhere else in the known universe." Maud approached the crystal as well, sensing the importance of this moment. "And other worlds want access to them," he guessed, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "That's the political complication you mentioned." Princess Papili nodded, her expression grave. "Several interstellar powers have expressed interest in establishing more formal relationships with Veridae, relationships that would inevitably lead to demands for access to our crystal resources." "Which factions support which positions?" Maud asked, thinking back to the various nobles he had met at the previous night's reception. The conservative faction, led by Lord Seven, advocates for complete isolation, no formal alliances, minimal trade, a continuation of Veriday's historical independence. The progressives, under Lady Mira, favor engagement with the Galactic Alliance, which offers protection but would require significant concessions regarding resource access and governance. She turned back to the crystal, her hand still resting on its surface. My father has maintained a delicate balance between these factions for decades, allowing limited engagement while protecting Veriday's sovereignty. But his illness has emboldened both sides, and they see his impending passing and my ascension as an opportunity to shift policy decisively in their preferred direction. "And where do you stand?" Maud asked, watching her carefully. Princess Popoli was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the crystal. "I believe Veriday cannot remain isolated forever, but neither can we allow our resources to be exploited, our sovereignty compromised. I seek a middle path, engagement on our terms, alliances that respect our independence, relationships built on mutual benefit rather than extraction." She turned to face Maud directly. "But to achieve this, I need strength, not just the political strength of my position or the economic strength of Veriday's resources, but personal strength, the kind that commands respect across cultures and species. The kind of strength you saw in a human who fought snake eels in a canyon 7 years ago," Maud said quietly, understanding dawning. "Yes." Princess Popoli's blue eyes met his without hesitation. "The conservative faction expects me to choose a consort from among their sons, someone who will reinforce isolation and tradition. The progressives hope I will select from their families, signaling openness to external influence. Both see my choice of consort as a political decision, a signal of my intended policies. And you're considering a third option, a wild card, me." A smile touched her lips, but her eyes remained serious. "Not just a wild card, Maud, a symbol of cross-species respect and cooperation that doesn't require submission to external powers. A partner with the strength and experience to help navigate dangerous political waters. Someone not entangled in the web of existing court alliances and obligations." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the determination in her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw that spoke of the weight of responsibility she carried. "I meant what I said yesterday. I am not holding you to a child's promise, nor am I asking for an immediate commitment. I am asking for time. Time for you to understand Verity and its challenges. Time for the court to know you. Time for us to determine if an alliance between us could truly serve both our interests." Maud considered her words carefully, aware of the complexity of what she was proposing. "And if I decide it doesn't? If I choose to leave?" "Then you leave, with my gratitude for considering the possibility and resources sufficient to establish yourself comfortably wherever you choose to go next." Her answer was immediate and straightforward. "I seek a partner, Maud, not a prisoner or a puppet. The choice must be yours, freely made, or it has no value, to me, to Veriday, or to you." The honesty in her voice was compelling. Whatever game was being played in the court of Veriday, Princess Popoli herself seemed to be offering genuine choice, genuine partnership. It was more than Maud had been offered in years of drifting from world to world, taking whatever work came his way, surviving but never truly living. "Time," he repeated, echoing their conversation from the previous day. "I can give you that, in consideration of the possibility you've outlined." Relief softened her features. "That's all I ask, for now." She turned back to the crystal, its massive presence dominating the clearing. "There's something else I want to show you, something few off-worlders have ever seen. It may help you understand why Veriday is worth protecting." Princess Popoli placed both hands on the crystal's surface now, closing her eyes in concentration. For a moment, nothing happened. Then gradually, Maud became aware of a subtle change in the atmosphere of the clearing, a barely perceptible vibration, a shift in the quality of the light. The crystal began to glow from within, not with artificial illumination, but with what appeared to be its own internal energy. The glow spread from the central spire to the smaller crystals scattered throughout the clearing, creating a network of light that pulsed with a rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat. As the phenomenon intensified, Maud felt rather than heard a harmonic resonance, a complex pattern of vibrations that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and register directly in his mind. It was music without sound, communication without words, a sense of connection to the living forest around them that transcended ordinary perception. Princess Popoli opened her eyes, which now seemed to reflect the crystal's inner light. "This is the true heart of Verity," she said softly, "the crystal song that flows through our world, binding all life together. Our people can naturally perceive and interact with this energy, which is why we evolved as we did, why our civilization developed in harmony with our environment rather than in opposition to it." She removed her hands from the crystal, and gradually the phenomenon subsided, the glow receding until the crystal appeared as it had before, extraordinary but inert. "Few humans have ever witnessed a crystal awakening," she continued. "Fewer still have been able to perceive the song as you just did. Yes, I could see that you felt it. That suggests a compatibility, a potential for understanding between us that goes beyond the political considerations I outlined." Maud was silent for a moment, processing what he had experienced. In his years of travel throughout the galaxy, he had encountered many wonders, many claims of mystical or spiritual significance. But this had been different, tangible, measurable, yet also transcendent in a way that defied simple explanation. "Is this why other powers want access to Verity's crystals?" he asked finally. "For this energy?" "Partly, though most don't understand its true nature or significance. They see the practical applications: power generation, communication enhancement, medical uses, without comprehending that the crystals are not merely resources to be harvested, but living entities in their own right, integral to Verity's entire ecosystem. Removing them would be like removing organs from a living body, damaging not just to the crystals themselves, but to the entire world." She gestured around the clearing. "This is what I'm fighting to protect, Maud. Not just for Verity's sake, but because I believe the universe would be diminished if this were lost, if it were reduced to a commodity to be exploited and eventually exhausted." Maud understood. In his military days, he had seen the aftermath of such exploitation on too many worlds. Environments devastated, indigenous populations displaced or destroyed, unique cultural and biological treasures lost forever in the name of progress or profit. It was one of the reasons he had eventually left military service, unwilling to continue participating in what often amounted to sanctioned plunder. "I understand," he said simply, "and I agree that this is worth protecting." Princess Popoli's expression brightened, a genuine smile transforming her features. "I hoped you would. Not everyone does. Even among my own people, there are those who see the crystals merely as sources of wealth or power, not as entities worthy of respect in their own right." She looked up at the towering crystal one last time, then gestured back the way they had come. "We should return to the skimmers. There's more I want to show you today." As they made their way back through the forest, Maud found himself viewing his surroundings with new awareness, conscious now of the subtle energy that permeated the environment, the complex interconnections between the blue-leaf trees, the crystal formations, and the myriad life forms that made their home here. He also found himself reassessing Princess Popoli. The child he had rescued had grown into a young woman of remarkable depth and complexity, politically astute yet genuinely committed to principles beyond power, royal in bearing yet willing to venture into the wilderness without an entourage, capable of calculated maneuvering in court yet honest with him about her intentions and motivations. Whether her proposal, still only hinted at rather than formally stated, was one he should accept remained uncertain. But he was increasingly convinced that she herself was genuine, that whatever outcome they reached would be the result of honest negotiation rather than manipulation or deceit. That in itself was worth the time she had asked for. Time to know Verity, time to know her, time to determine if the future she envisioned was one he could share. The following weeks unfolded in a pattern that gradually became familiar to Maud. His days were divided between formal duties in the palace, attending council meetings as Princess Popoli's advisor on interspecies relations, participating in diplomatic receptions, studying Veridean history and culture, and private excursions with the princess herself, exploring the diverse landscapes and communities of Verde, far from the watchful eyes of the court. These private journeys, undertaken on skimmers or occasionally on foot, revealed to Maud a world of extraordinary beauty and complexity. Princess Populi proved to be an enthusiastic and knowledgeable guide, leading him from the crystal forests of the east to the azure plains of the north, from traditional Verdean villages where life had changed little in centuries to modern settlements where sophisticated technology enhanced rather than replaced natural processes. Throughout these explorations, their conversations ranged widely, from practical discussions of Verdean politics and interstellar relations to more personal exchanges about their respective experiences, beliefs, and hopes for the future. Gradually, a genuine connection began to form between them, a relationship based not on a child's promise or political calculation, but on mutual respect and growing understanding. In the palace, meanwhile, Maud's presence continued to provoke speculation and maneuvering among the noble factions. Lord Savan and the conservatives maintained a posture of polite disdain, treating the human advisor as a temporary curiosity who would eventually be dismissed or relegated to an insignificant role. Lady Mira and the progressives adopted a more welcoming approach, seemingly hoping to recruit Maud to their cause, or at least to drive a wedge between him and the more traditionally minded Princess Popili. Neither faction appeared to seriously consider the possibility that Princess Popili's interest in Maud might be personal as well as political, that the advisor role might be merely a prelude to a more significant position. The idea of a human consort to the future Queen of Verity was simply too radical, too unprecedented to be contemplated by even the most forward-thinking nobles. Maud himself remained carefully neutral in these political maneuverings, following Princess Popili's lead in public, while privately discussing strategy with her during their expeditions beyond the palace walls. He was under no illusions about the challenges they would face if they did proceed with the alliance she had proposed. The resistance from traditionalists would be fierce, the pressure from external powers intense, the personal adjustments substantial for both of them. And yet, as the weeks passed, the possibility seemed increasingly less outlandish, the potential benefits more compelling. Maud had never sought power or position for their own sake, but the opportunity to make a meaningful difference, to help protect a world as unique and valuable as Verade from exploitation, to stand beside a leader he was coming to genuinely respect and admire, these were prospects worth considering seriously. The turning point came approximately a month after Maud's arrival in Verade. He and Princess Popili had ventured to the southern reaches of the inhabited territories, a region known as the Azure Coast, where the land met a sea that reflected the blue of the sky so perfectly that the horizon seemed to disappear, creating the illusion of infinite blue stretching in all directions. They stood on a cliff overlooking this breathtaking vista, the gentle rhythm of the waves below creating a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Their skimmers were parked some distance away, giving them privacy even from the small security detail that had accompanied them on this longer journey. "My father wishes to meet you," Princess Popili said abruptly, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between them. "He's been following your activities in the palace and has heard my reports of our expeditions. He says it's time he formed his own assessment." Maud turned to look at her, noting the mixture of affection and concern in her expression when she spoke of her father. "I'd be honored to meet him," he replied, "though I was under the impression his health made such meetings difficult." "It does. He rarely receives visitors now, conserving his strength for essential state functions. The fact that he has specifically requested your presence is significant." She met Maud's gaze directly. "It suggests he is taking seriously the possibility of what we have discussed. My father may be physically weakened, but his mind remains sharp, his political instincts keen. He would not waste energy on meeting you unless he saw genuine potential in the alliance I have proposed." Maud nodded, understanding the implications. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, in his private chambers rather than the formal throne room. It will be a conversation, not a state occasion." She hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty crossing her features. "Maud, I must be direct. This meeting may well be decisive. My father's approval would not guarantee the success of our proposed alliance. There would still be considerable opposition from various factions, but his disapproval would make it virtually impossible. He remains king of Verde, and his word on matters of succession and royal marriage carries immense weight, even as his direct involvement in governance has diminished. I understand, Maud said simply. I'll speak honestly with him, as I have with you. Princess Poppy smiled, reaching out to touch his arm lightly. Another small sign of the increasing comfort between them. That's all I ask. My father values directness. It's one of the reasons I believe you may find common ground with him, despite your very different backgrounds. She looked back out at the endless blue of the sea and sky. I have not pressed you for a decision, Maud, because I wanted to give you time to truly know Verde, to understand what accepting my proposal would mean. But after tomorrow's meeting with my father, we will need to speak openly about your intentions. The court cannot be kept in a suspense indefinitely, and decisions about Verde's future direction cannot be delayed much longer. Maud nodded, appreciating her honesty. Fair enough. For what it's worth, these weeks on Verde have been illuminating. Whatever decision I reach, I won't regret the time spent here. Princess Poppy turned to face him fully, her expression solemn yet somehow vulnerable. And I won't regret extending the invitation, whatever you decide. But I hope... She stopped, seeming to catch herself before completing the thought. You hope? Maud prompted gently. She smiled, a hint of her childhood self visible in the expression. I hope you'll choose to stay, not just for Verde's sake, or for political advantage, but because I have come to value your presence in my life, your perspective, your directness, your quiet strength. These are qualities I admire not just in an ally but in a potential partner. It was the most personal statement she had made thus far, the closest she had come to, acknowledging that her interest in him went beyond the political calculations she had initially outlined. Maud found himself touched by her honesty, by the courage it took to express such sentiment when their future remained uncertain. I value your presence as well, he replied, equally honest, more than I expected to when I first received your invitation. But whether that's enough to build a life and end a political alliance upon, that's the question I'm still answering for myself. She nodded, accepting this response without pressing for more. Tomorrow then, after you've met my father, we'll speak again, and perhaps you'll have your answer. They stood for a while longer on the cliff, watching as the setting sun transformed the infinite blue into a tapestry of purple and gold. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was comfortable, a shared appreciation of the moment that required no words. As they finally turned to return to their skimmers, Maud found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From the harsh isolation of Zaros to this moment of connection on a cliff overlooking an alien sea, in the company of a woman who had once been a child he rescued from danger and who now proposed a partnership that could change both their lives and the fate of an entire world. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whatever decision he might reach, he was grateful for this unexpected turn in his long and often lonely path through the universe. Some journeys were worth taking for their own sake, regardless of destination. This, he was increasingly convinced, was one of them. The king's private chambers were located in a secluded wing of the palace, away from the bustle of court activities and administrative functions. As Renal led Maud through corridors that grew progressively quieter and more sparsely populated, the atmosphere itself seemed to change, the air becoming somehow heavier, charged with the solemn significance of approaching a ruler in decline. Maud had dressed with care for this meeting, selecting clothing that struck a balance between formality and authenticity, a tunic and trousers of Veridean design, but in colors and a style that acknowledged his human origins, rather than attempting to mimic Veridean fashion too closely. At the entrance to the royal apartments, they were met by a tall, austere Veridean woman, whom Ronald addressed as Chief Physician Tella. She regarded Maud with clinical assessment, rather than the political calculation he had grown accustomed to from the court nobles. His Majesty is having one of his better days, she informed them, her tone brisk and professional. Nevertheless, the meeting must be kept brief. 20 minutes at most. I will monitor from the adjoining room and will signal when time has elapsed. Maud nodded his understanding. Ronald, having delivered him to his destination, withdrew with a formal bow, leaving Maud in the physician's care. His Majesty is aware of your unusual status. Tella continued as she led Maud through an anteroom richly appointed with historical artifacts and family portraits. He has been briefed on your activities since arriving on Veraday. I should warn you that while his mind remains sharp, his physical condition means he tires easily and occasionally experiences pain that may interrupt conversation. Do not be alarmed if this occurs. I understand, Maud replied. Thank you for the warning. They stopped before a set of ornately carved wooden doors. Actual wood, not the crystal composite materials that dominated much of the palace architecture. Tella touched a small panel beside the doors, then nodded at whatever response she received. His Majesty will see you now, she said, opening one of the doors and gesturing for Maud to enter. Remember, 20 minutes. Maud stepped into a spacious chamber that managed to be both regal and surprisingly comfortable. Large windows overlooked a private garden, filling the room with natural light. The furnishings were elegant, but designed for practicality rather than show, with particular attention to supporting a physically weakened occupant. And there, seated in a specially designed chair near the windows, was the King of Veraday. Maud's first impression was of a once powerful figure, now diminished by illness, but still commanding respect. King Torin's blue skin had faded to a paler shade than was typical for Veradayan adults, and his frame, while tall, had a fragility that spoke of significant weight loss and muscle atrophy. But his eyes, the same deep blue as his daughter's, remained alert and penetrating, and his posture, though supported by his chair, conveyed dignity rather than defeat. Maud of Earth, the king said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his physical condition. Approach, please. My eyes are not what they once were. Maud moved forward, stopping at a respectful distance from the king's chair. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect rather than subservience. Your Majesty, thank you for receiving me. The king studied him for a long moment, those penetrating blue eyes seeming to look beyond surface appearances to something deeper. So you are the human who rescued my daughter 7 years ago, and who now returns to my court in a role that has the entire nobility speculating wildly. There was a hint of amusement in his tone, suggesting he found the court's consternation somewhat entertaining. He gestured to a chair positioned nearby. Sit, please. Let us speak plainly while we have the opportunity. Tella is undoubtedly already counting the minutes. Maud sat as directed, maintaining eye contact with the king. I prefer plain speaking, Your Majesty. As do I, though it's a luxury rarely afforded to kings. King Torin shifted slightly in his chair, a brief flicker of pain crossing his features, before his expression returned to one of calm authority. My daughter tells me she has shown you much of Veraday during these past weeks. What do you think of our world? It's extraordinary, Maud replied honestly. Unlike any planet I've encountered in my travels. The crystal formations alone would make it unique, but it's the integration, the way Veradayan society has developed in harmony with the natural environment rather than trying to conquer it, that truly sets it apart. The king nodded slightly, apparently approving of this assessment. And what of our political situation? I'm sure Papili has briefed you on the challenges we face, both internally and in relation to external powers. She has. Verity stands at a crossroads with powerful interests pushing for either complete isolation or potentially exploitative engagement. Neither path seems optimal for Veraday's long-term well-being. Succinctly put, the king's gaze remained fixed on Maud's face. And what of your own position in this complex equation? You arrive as an advisor on interspecies relations, yet spend more time in private exploration with my daughter than in actual advisory functions. The court speculates, as courts do. I prefer to hear directly from you. Maud appreciated the directness of the question, though he knew his answer would be consequential. Princess Papili invited me to Veraday to evaluate a potential alliance, personal and political. She believes that such an alliance might offer Veraday a third path between isolation and exploitation, demonstrating that engagement with the wider universe is possible while maintaining Veradayan sovereignty and values. An alliance, the king repeated the word thoughtfully, a diplomatic term for what would traditionally be called a marriage. Between my daughter, future Queen of Verity, and a human of no particular political standing or noble lineage. You can imagine how the conservative faction views this possibility. With horror and opposition, I would assume, Maud replied dryly. A smile touched the king's lips briefly. That's a charitable description of their reaction. Yet my daughter persists in this course, bringing you here, showing you our world, introducing you to our ways. She must see something in you beyond the hero who saved her life as a child. It wasn't quite a question, but Maud understood the implicit request for his perspective. Princess Poppily believes that my background, my military experience, my travels across multiple worlds, my position outside existing court factions, could be valuable in navigating the challenges Verde faces. She also believes that a human consort would send a powerful message about Verde's approach to interspecies relations. All true, no doubt, and politically astute, as my daughter typically is. The king's expression became more penetrating. But politics alone rarely sustain a royal marriage, particularly in times of crisis. What of the personal dimension? What of compatibility, mutual respect, shared values? These may seem secondary considerations in royal alliances, but I have found them essential to effective governance as well as personal contentment. Maud considered his response carefully. Princess Popili and I have spent considerable time together during these past weeks. We've spoken openly about many subjects, personal and political. I've come to respect her intelligence, her commitment to Verde, her courage in considering unconventional solutions to difficult problems. Whether that constitutes sufficient basis for a lasting personal alliance, that's a question I'm still answering for myself. The king nodded slowly, seemingly appreciating Maud's honesty. And what of your own ambitions in this matter? The consort to the Queen of Verde would wield significant influence, even without formal authority. Some might see this as an attractive prospect for a man who has, by his own account, spent years drifting from world to world with no fixed purpose or position. The question was direct, even challenging, but Maud recognized it as a necessary one. A father and king needed to be certain of the motivations of a potential consort to his daughter and successor. I've never sought power or position, Your Majesty. My military career offered both, yet I left it behind. If power were my goal, there are more straightforward paths than becoming the controversial human consort to a Viridian queen. Maud met the king's gaze steadily. What appeals to me about Princess Poppili's proposal is not the influence it might confer, but the purpose. Protecting a world worth protecting, standing beside a leader worth supporting, contributing to something larger than my own survival. These are things I've lacked in recent years, things I've found myself missing without fully realizing it until now. For a long moment, the king was silent, his expression unreadable as he continued to study Maud. Then with a slight gesture, he indicated a crystal decanter and glasses on a nearby table. Would you pour for us both? A small measure only. Teller restricts my intake, but I find a good conversation deserves a proper toast. Maud rose and moved to the table, pouring a small amount of the amber liquid into each of the two glasses. He returned to the king, offering him one glass before resuming his seat with the other. The king raised his glass slightly. To honesty in an age of calculation. Maud returned the gesture, then sipped the beverage, a liqueur with complex notes of spice and sweetness, warming but not burning as it went down. The king took a small sip as well, seeming to savor the taste before setting his glass aside. My daughter has always been headstrong, he said, his tone softening slightly. Even as a child, she questioned everything, insisted on understanding the reasons behind traditions and protocols rather than simply accepting them. The incident in the Canyon of Shadows, her wandering off from her guards, her fall into the crevice, was characteristic of her determination to explore beyond established boundaries. A hint of fondness entered his expression. When she returned from that adventure, she informed me quite solemnly that she had promised to marry her rescuer when she grew up. I thought little of it at the time, the fanciful declaration of a child overwhelmed by the drama of the day. But Popley has never been one to make promises lightly, even as a child. I should have remembered that. He shifted again in his chair, another brief expression of pain crossing his features before he continued. She has grown into a leader of remarkable potential, intelligent, principled, pragmatic without being cynical. She will face challenges as queen that I did not face as king, particularly with the increased interest in Veraday from external powers. The path she proposes, with you at her side, is unconventional, fraught with political risk, certain to provoke opposition from traditionalists. And yet, he paused, gazing out the window at the private garden for a moment before returning his attention to Maud. And yet I find myself intrigued by its possibilities. A demonstration that Veraday can engage with the wider universe without surrendering its sovereignty or unique character. A symbol of cross-species cooperation that might inspire new approaches to old conflicts. A partner for my daughter who brings perspectives and experiences beyond those available within our traditional power structures. The king's voice grew slightly stronger, more decisive. I have not yet given Popley my decision regarding her proposal, but I will tell you, Maud of Earth, that I am more open to the possibility than many in my court would expect. Not despite my concern for Veraday's future, but because of it. Sometimes tradition must bend if it is not to break entirely. Maud nodded, understanding the significance of what the king was saying. His support, while not yet fully committed, would be crucial if he and Princess Papili decided to proceed with the alliance she had proposed. There is one more matter I wish to address, the king continued, his expression growing more somber. My health, as you can see, is failing. The royal physicians speak in hopeful terms, but I have ruled long enough to recognize when hard truths are being softened for my benefit. I have perhaps a year remaining, possibly less. Papili knows this, though she maintains the hope characteristic of youth. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. If you choose to accept my daughter's proposal, you will likely become consort to the Queen of Veraday sooner rather than later. The transition period following my death will be particularly dangerous, politically, diplomatically, perhaps even physically. External powers will test Papili's resolve, internal factions will maneuver for advantage, traditional allies may reconsider their positions in light of new leadership. The king's voice dropped, becoming almost confidential. I ask you, not as king to subject, but as father to potential son by alliance, are you prepared for what this role would truly entail? Not just the ceremonial functions or diplomatic duties, but standing firm beside Papili when powerful forces seek to manipulate or control her, offering counsel based on experience rather than ambition, perhaps even placing yourself physically between her and danger, should it come to that? Maud didn't need to consider his answer. It came from a place deeper than calculation or ambition, from the core of who he was, who he had always been. Yes, if I accept this alliance, I accept all that comes with it, including the responsibility to protect and support Princess Popley through whatever challenges arise. That's not contingent on title or position, it's simply who I am. Something in the king's expression softened, a tension releasing that Maud hadn't fully registered until it was gone. I believe you, he said simply, and that, Maud of Earth, may be the highest compliment I can offer after a lifetime of politics where belief comes rarely and at great cost. A soft chime sounded, indicating that their allotted time was nearly complete. The king straightened slightly in his chair, his manner becoming more formal once more. You have given me much to consider, as I hope I have given you. Speak with my daughter. Reach your decision based not on what might be politically expedient or traditionally acceptable, but on what you believe is right, for yourself, for Papili, for Veraday. I will do the same. Maud rose, understanding that the audience was concluding. He bowed again, this time with genuine respect rather than mere protocol. Thank you for your candor, Your Majesty, and for your consideration of a possibility that many would dismiss without examination. The king inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from beyond our customary circles. Remember that, should you one day find yourself advising a queen? As Maud turned to leave, the door opened to reveal Tella waiting expectantly. He cast one last glance at the King of Veraday, seeing not just the diminished physical presence, but the strength of character and clarity of purpose that remained undiminished by illness. It was not difficult to see where Princess Popoli had inherited her own determination and principled pragmatism. Whatever decision he reached regarding her proposal, Maud was grateful for this opportunity to meet the man who had shaped her formative years. In understanding the father, he felt he had gained deeper insight into the daughter and into the kingdom they both served with such dedication. Princess Popili was waiting for Maud in the garden pavilion, where they had shared breakfast on his first full day at the palace. As he approached, he noticed that she had dispensed with the formal attire typical of her public appearances, instead wearing a simple tunic and trousers, similar to what she had worn during their explorations of Verede's wilderness. Her hair was arranged in a looser style and she wore no jewelry save for a single blue crystal pendant, the same one she often touched unconsciously when deep in thought. She rose as he entered, her expression a mixture of anticipation and carefully controlled anxiety. "How was your meeting with my father?" she asked directly, dispensing with pleasantries. Maud moved to join her, taking the seat opposite hers at the small table, where they had shared so many conversations over the past weeks. "Enlightening. He's an impressive man, even in his current state of health." "He always has been," Princess Popili replied, a note of affection and sadness in her voice. "Strong-willed yet flexible when necessary, principled yet pragmatic. I've tried to learn from his example, though I suspect every ruler ultimately must find their own path." She hesitated, then asked the question that clearly weighed most heavily on her mind. "Did he express an opinion regarding the possibility we've been discussing?" "He said he was intrigued by the possibilities, more open to the idea than many in the court would expect," Maud replied honestly. "Not an unequivocal endorsement, but certainly not rejection." Relief softened her features momentarily before her typical composure reasserted itself. "That's, encouraging. My father has always been a traditionalist in many ways, but a pragmatic one. He understands that Verity's circumstances are changing, that old approaches may not serve us well in the challenges to come." She studied Maud's face carefully. "And what of you? Has your meeting with my father affected your thinking about the proposal I've outlined?" This was the moment of decision, the culmination of weeks of exploration, discussion, and careful consideration. Maud had spent the time since leaving the king's chambers in solitary reflection, weighing all aspects of the extraordinary proposition that had brought him from the isolation of Zarus to this garden pavilion in the royal palace of Verede. "It has," he acknowledged, "not because his approval or disapproval is the determining factor, but because seeing you through his eyes, hearing him speak of you, of Verede, of the challenges you both face, helped clarify my own thoughts on the matter." Maud leaned forward slightly, holding Princess Popoli's gaze. "I've come to a decision. If you still believe this alliance would serve Verede's interests and your own, then I am willing to accept your proposal, to become your consort, to stand beside you as you navigate the challenges ahead, to contribute what skills and perspective I can to protecting this world and supporting your leadership." The words once spoken seemed to hang in the air between them, consequential, irrevocable, transformative. Princess Popoli's expression remained controlled, but her eyes reflected a complex mixture of emotions: relief, satisfaction, perhaps even a hint of personal happiness beneath the political considerations. "I do still believe it," she said after a moment, "more strongly now than when I first invited you to Verede. These weeks have confirmed what I hoped, that you possess the qualities needed for this role, that we can work together effectively, that there is potential for a genuine partnership between us rather than merely a political arrangement." She reached across the table, her blue hand coming to rest lightly on his, a rare gesture of physical connection that underscored the significance of the moment. "I accept your acceptance, Maud of Earth, and I promise that you will not regret this decision. Whatever challenges we face, we will face them together, as allies and partners." Maud turned his hand to clasp hers briefly, sealing their agreement with this simple gesture. "Partners," he repeated, finding that the word felt right, natural, despite the extraordinary circumstances that had led to this moment. Princess Popili withdrew her hand after a moment, her expression becoming more focused, practical. There will be opposition, of course. The conservative faction will be outraged, the progressives confused, and potentially threatened. External powers will reassess their strategies for influencing Verdi once news of our alliance spreads beyond our borders. I expected nothing less, Maud replied with a slight smile. Politics is rarely simple, particularly when it involves breaking with tradition. Indeed, but we have advantages. My father's tentative support, which will carry significant weight, the symbolic power of our alliance as a demonstration of Verdi's approach to interspecies relations, your own qualities which will become increasingly apparent to those who initially dismiss you based solely on your origins. She rose from her seat, moving to stand by the edge of the pavilion where the cultivated gardens gave way to the wilder landscape beyond the palace walls. We should proceed deliberately but without unnecessary delay. A formal announcement within the week, followed by a period of careful introduction of the concept to key stakeholders, the noble houses, our closest allies among other worlds, representatives of the major interstellar powers. Maud joined her, standing beside her as they both gazed out at the stunning view. And the ceremony itself? I confess I know little of Veridean marriage traditions, particularly as they apply to the royal family. Traditionally, royal weddings on Veride are elaborate affairs, planned over months or even years, involving complex rituals and extensive celebration throughout the kingdom. Princess Poppy's expression became thoughtful. But given the unusual nature of our alliance and the time constraints imposed by my father's health, I believe a modified approach would be appropriate, something that respects tradition while acknowledging the unique circumstances. She turned to face him directly. There is also the question of your specific role and title. Consort is the traditional designation for the spouse of a ruling monarch, but it carries certain connotations in Veridean culture that may not fully reflect the partnership we envision. We might consider alternatives that better communicate your function as an active participant in governance rather than merely a ceremonial figure. Maud nodded, appreciating her attention to these details. I'll leave the specifics to you, at least regarding Veridean tradition and protocol. My concern is less with titles or ceremonies than with the substance of what we're creating, a partnership that serves Veride's interests while remaining true to our own principles. A smile touched Princess Poppy's lips. A characteristically practical perspective. It's one of the qualities I've come to value in you, Maud. This focus on substance over form, on actual impact rather than appearance. She looked back out at the view, her expression becoming more somber. There will be difficult days ahead. The path we've chosen is unprecedented, certain to face resistance from multiple quarters. There may be times when you question this decision, when the challenges seem insurmountable, when the opposition appears too entrenched to overcome. I've faced difficult odds before, Maud replied quietly. We both have. It's part of what brought us to this moment. Yes, Princess Poppy's voice softened slightly. A small blue girl making a promise to her human rescuer. Who could have predicted where that childish declaration would lead? Maud thought back to that moment in the Canyon of Shadows, to the earnest face of the child looking up at him with absolute faith and determination. Perhaps it was always leading here, he suggested, not by fate or destiny, but by the choices we each made that brought us step by step to this garden, to this decision. Princess Poppy considered this, then nodded slowly. A partnership forged not by tradition or political calculation alone, but by shared experience, mutual respect, complementary strengths. Perhaps that's the foundation we need to face what's coming, not just for ourselves, but for Veride and its place in the wider universe. She straightened, her royal bearing reasserting itself. We should inform my father of our decision. He will want to be included in the planning for the announcement, even if his health limits his direct participation. As they prepared to leave the pavilion, to take the first steps in implementing their momentous decision, Princess Poppy paused, looking up at Maud with an expression more personal than political, more Poppy than princess. Thank you, she said simply, for considering my proposal seriously, for taking the time to know Veride and its challenges, for being willing to embark on this unprecedented journey. Whatever happens from this point forward, I am grateful that the promise I made as a child has led to this moment of genuine choice and commitment between us as adults. Maud recognized the sincerity in her words, the glimpse of the woman behind the royal facade. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he replied, "for seeing potential in a drifter from Zarus, for offering purpose when I had none, for trusting me with something as precious as Veriday's future." A shared understanding passed between them, acknowledgement that while their alliance had begun with political considerations, it had evolved into something more complex, more personal, with potential that neither could fully predict, but both were committed to exploring together. Side by side, the human warrior and the Veridaean princess left the garden pavilion, stepping from the private moment of decision into the public arena, where that decision would reshape not just their own lives, but the future of an entire world. The challenges ahead were substantial, the opposition certain, the outcome far from guaranteed. But in that moment, as they walked together through the gardens of the royal palace, there was also hope. Hope that this unconventional alliance might chart a new course for Veridae, demonstrating that engagement with the wider universe need not come at the cost of sovereignty or identity, that bridges could be built between different species and cultures without requiring submission or dominance. And perhaps, though neither would have expressed it so directly, hope that in fulfilling a child's promise, made in gratitude and admiration, they might also find personal fulfillment in a partnership initially conceived for political purposes, but increasingly shaped by genuine respect and growing affection. The sun was setting over Veridae, casting the blue landscape in hues of purple and gold. Tomorrow would bring the first steps in announcing their decision to the court, to the kingdom, eventually to the universe beyond. But for now, in this moment of transition between private choice and public consequence, they walked in companionable silence, united in purpose and committed to the path ahead, whatever it might hold. The alien princess had kept her promise to the human who had saved her life. What that promise would ultimately mean for them both, and for Veridae itself, remained to be written in the days and years to come. If you like this story, click the hype button. This video deserves to be popular. Have a nice day.